Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to another event of current events. Today we have William Tabb that is going to talk to us about what's happening to the economy. Maybe he knows, I don't know. But before we start, please turn your phones to mute or turn them off. And if there is an emergency and we get an alert or alarm, what do? Stay in place. Don't do anything until we are told to leave if necessary. And if we do, the people that can be out on their own get out first. I don't know what we do with the others, so we'll figure it out. Okay, so without further ado, William?
Jakob, is this all right? Can people hear?
Usually it works better when it's turned on.
Is this better? Good. Oh, Bill can hear, but Tom can't, so maybe a little louder.
Louder?
Louder. Or hold it up to his mouth.
Say something.
Say something. Is that better? Yes. Okay. After Yakov introduced me as a retired economics professor when I gave my Earth Day talk, someone came up to me and asked what's going on with the economy. So today I'm going to try and answer that. However, as you know, it changes every day, and it is very hard to keep track of. I had to make some new notes today as a couple of important things happened, and I'll talk about those. But I'll take a crack at answering the question, and then in the discussion period, people can ask questions or make statements, and some of you who've had your radios on 2 minutes before we began may have still new information. We'll see. Okay, the problem is that Mr. Trump has taken a much more active role in the economy than any other president, perhaps since Roosevelt. But unlike Roosevelt with his brain trust, Mr. Trump counts on his own judgment, and that changes. And so we have to try and keep up. So the first thing I want to talk about is Mr. Trump's tariffs. And the tariffs are only part of the interaction with other countries, as I'll need to talk about, but they're the most important. Second is the doings of Elon Musk's DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency, which, as you know, is not a department of the government and is not about efficiency. And as you may also know, Mr. Musk has retreated from his role and has left government to try and figure out what to do about SpaceX. The rockets keep exploding and the takeoffs don't take off. And there's the matter of Tesla, where the stock has fallen 70%. There may be some reason for this. Perhaps some of you may know, but we can talk about it. The third is his big, beautiful bill. This is a piece of legislation that the president and the Republicans in Congress are trying to reach agreement on and then to pass through Congress. The Republicans have a small majority, and so they could pass this bill if they could all agree. after some negotiations, the House has passed a bill, but the senators have other ideas. But the bill will be very important, if for no other reason than it's likely to increase the deficit by trillions of dollars. And this is significant. These three areas, the tariffs, DOGE, and this bill, have created uncertainty in the markets. And those of you who've been watching your retirement funds may have seen some movement up and down in your valuations as people try and figure out what this means. Now, during the campaign, we saw Donald Trump attack Kamala Harris, calling her Comrade Kamala. She's a communist, I guess, he said on the Sean Ryan show. This country is not ready for a Marxist or a communist. Perhaps you recall these kinds of statements. When Trump campaign was asked what he meant by this, what they said was, she's suggesting economic policies. I guess I should quote it exactly. Kamala Harris has literally suggested price controls as a matter of economic policy. She said it would encourage you to inspect the full documented list of Marxists and communists who've suggested the same. That is what the Trump campaign was criticizing her for, was suggesting price controls, that the government, the president, would impose price controls. Now, once Donald Trump won the election, he has imposed and suggested price controls of pharmaceuticals, but also other areas where his tariffs are going to raise the price of items. And he has suggested to companies that they do not raise their prices on the pretense that tariffs are forcing them to raise prices. And he has become the advocate of price controls. He has warned companies not to do this. In talking to Time magazine, Mr. Trump said that the US economy is like a department store. Quote, it's a giant, beautiful store, and everybody wants to go shopping there. And on behalf of the American people, I own the store, and I set prices. And I'll say, if you want to shop here, this is what you have to pay. Well, this has created, among people who believe in free markets, some unhappiness. It has also created among investors uncertainty as to what's going to go on. And that has led them to sell American assets. And this will make it harder, if we have a large deficit, to borrow the money from foreigners who are major buyers of treasury bonds and notes and so on. So this is the concern. Now, as Mr. Trump said, this is all Joe Biden's fault. On the other hand, if one looks at the quarterly data produced by the Bureau of Economic Analysis, the Bureau is part of our Commerce Department, it appears to most observers that the Trump administration policies have thrown the economy into reverse, turning the 2.4% annualized GDP growth of the last quarter of 2024, when Mr. Biden was president, into a 0.3% contraction in the first quarter of this year. And the forecast is for further contraction. And it will be difficult. Well, let me read from one financial analyst. Growth has simply vanished, said one prominent financial analyst. There is simply no way for policy advisors to sugarcoat this. Well, actually, that's not the case. There's a lot of sugarcoating going on. President Trump's trade advisor, Peter Navarro, announced that the report really should be very positive news for America and was the best negative growth report I have ever seen in my life. The rosy adjectives flowed, quote, very, very good and quite encouraging. Huge, literally off the charts, good, strong news, all things are good. So we felt really good about that number. The White House press secretary, Caroline Levitt, who we rely on, issued a statement saying, quote, the underlying numbers tell the real story of this goose paper sticks together. The strong momentum President Trump is delivering, and that Trump's policies, quote, are fueling an economic boom. Now, since I've learned that the alternative reality is the real reality, I tend to accept that. But as Washington Post columnist Dana Milbank commented on such administration statements, quoting George Orwell's 1984, war is peace, freedom is slavery, ignorance is strength, and then he added, and bust is boom. As the consequences of the administration's policies become more apparent, Milbank continued, Trump and his lieutenants have retreated to a fantasy land. My favorite is the cabinet meeting that took place after the first quarter's data was released. I don't know if you remember that, the hats. Does anybody remember what the hats said? Gulf of America? That's what the hats said, yes. And there, as one columnist described the effusive praise for the, quote, genius of dear leader and the shared accounts of fictional achievements, Mr. President, your first 100 days has far exceeded that of any other president in this country ever. Never seen anything like it, gushed Attorney General Pam Bondi. She disclosed that Trump's efforts to interdict fentanyl have, in just 100 days, saved 258 million lives. This is fairly incredible. Donald Trump had already saved 76% of the U.S. population from certain death. A major achievement. The president declared that tourism is way up. Actually, it's ways down. He said eggs are down 87%. Has anybody bought eggs recently? Are they down 87%? Okay, and that Doge has found hundreds of billions of dollars of waste, fraud, and abuse. I don't know that I have to go through numbers and the opinions of what those numbers mean, but let's start with tariffs. In a recent interview, Terry Moran of ABC News asked President Trump about economists who were warning that his trade war with China will cost the typical American family thousands of dollars. The correspondent said that many who voted for Trump feared the fallout. Mr. Trump replied, well, they did sign up for it actually. This is what I campaigned on. Then he insisted that China will, quote, eat those tariffs rather than raise prices. Few economists agree, and few consumers agree, that at the cabinet meeting, President Trump said, maybe the children will have $2 instead of $30. Did you follow that? I know many of you are going to buy $30 for your grandchildren or great-grandchildren. Trump's assumption for decades has been that Americans can have it all. During a recent rally, he again promised to make the country wealthy again. Yet here he was acknowledging to his cabinet that Americans might need to pay more money for less stuff. Even a slight majority of Republicans, 51%, say they think Trump's economic policies will cause an economic recession. In the short term, even as they overwhelmingly continue to support Mr. Trump, they worry. The Wall Street Journal, in an editorial, this is the May 12th paper, and it's worth reading in its entirety. Its title is The Great Trump Tariff Rollback. The journal wrote, quote, rarely has an economic policy been repudiated so soundly and as quickly as President Trump's Liberation Day tariff, and by Mr. Trump's own hand, witnessed the agreement Monday morning to scale back his punitive tariffs on China. And that was his second major retreat in less than a week. This is a win for economic reality and for American prosperity. The win was that he withdrew his tariffs. He has now done this a number of times, and foreigners have figured out that there's a pattern here. He makes some strong statement of this major thing he's going to do, and when the markets go down and his advisors talk to him and his donors talk to him, he backs off. With regard to China, we're now in a 90-day freeze on the 135% tariffs, so that importers in our country can put their orders in for those dolls for Christmas and get them before the 90 days are up. That's the major function of putting it off, while he says he's negotiating with China. The journal called these tariffs mutually assured destruction, that they were not just bad for China, they were bad for us, the United States, as well. Trump's tariffs could cause stagflation. And the reason I say could and might is we don't know. We only have the opinions of economists, the Wall Street Journal, other investors, and so on, about what might happen if this stuff continues. So foreigners have figured this out. David Frum, who's a former speechwriter for George W. Bush, has written, as a politician, Trump vowed, quote, to make America great again, with the same predatory method he used in business. He does not appear to believe in mutually beneficial transactions. The only way he feels confident that he prevailed is if the other party suffers. His plan for enriching America was predicated on dominating and wronging others. Plans like this, Mr. Frum said, seldom work even at the start and never work for long. Now, while there's this freeze on the worst of the tariffs against China, there's also his initial tariffs from April 2nd. You remember it was called Liberation Day. because it was going to liberate our country from these foreigners who were sucking our money, and that was caused by the deficit. They were getting all our dollars. However, we were getting all their stuff, so it was not a bad deal for us, but the president felt it was wrong. So large tariffs were placed on large countries, small countries, in Africa, on a tiny remote Antarctic outpost populated by seals, where no people lived, places without consequences for America's balance of payments whatsoever, and on products like coffee, and you know we grow all sorts of coffee here in New York State, and bananas, and you know how many bananas we grow. Things that made no sense economically and have not been changed. Now, why was that? What was Mr. Trump's rationale? How did he understand what he was doing? But it's important to understand why he believes this. President Trump invoked the tariffs the United States had at the end of the 19th century. He said, in the 1890s, our country was probably the wealthiest it has ever been because of a system of tariffs. You know that? It was the tariffs that made America great in the 1890s when we were industrializing and moving ahead of Great Britain and other countries. Speaking as the GOP presidential nominee, he said, we had a good president, you know, McKinley, remember Mount McKinley? He was a very good businessman, and he took in billions of dollars at the time, and we were wealthy, a very wealthy country at the time. Tariffs would, Mr. Trump said, be paid by foreigners who wanted to sell us their goods. Now, there's more to what he said, but Trump's tariffs across the board, on again, off again, have been chaotic and have lost favor at home, and certainly have confused people abroad, where governments are afraid to negotiate with Mr. Trump because for some reason they think he doesn't keep his bargains. And as soon as you have made concessions, he asks for more concessions. Now, I don't know that that's true, but the high cost that tariffs are creating do matter for American consumers, and Mr. Trump has acknowledged this. He has urged Walmart to absorb the cost of the tariffs after the retailer said it would have to raise prices because it was paying more for the goods coming into the country than it was going to sell to Americans. When Walmart, and it was just one of several countries that have said this, that they've been forced to pass on the higher prices, the president told them not to do so. Quote, Walmart should stop. And as you know, those of you who follow him on social, whatever, his social media outlet, he capitalizes lots of things. So trying to blame tariffs as the reason for raising prices, he wrote on Truth Social. He called on Walmart to, again in all caps, eat the tariffs and keep prices down. I'll be watching, and so will your customers, he wrote. So we have been saying the Chinese will eat the tariffs, but Walmart and all these other companies cannot raise prices and blame it on tariffs in his view. You had a lot of statements by the president. I'll just one other. When Mattel warned that it might raise the price of its toys, including those Barbie dolls, as a result of the tariff, Mr. Trump threatened to impose 100% tariff on Mattel's products, saying it won't sell one toy in the United States. So here we were until, and I'll maybe put this off for a little bit and talk about the other elements, a court in the United States that Mr. Trump cannot get around told him his tariffs are illegal for reasons I'll get into. And that changes this entire thing depending on whether the Supreme Court acts for him or against him. We'll talk about that because it's difficult. That today's paper, the New York Times in this case, but also the Washington Post, the headline in the Post was, U.S. will, quote, aggressively, unquote, revoke visas of Chinese students. That is, the State Department will not allow Chinese students to come into the United States, according to Secretary of State Marco Rubio. Students will have their visas canceled, including people with ties to the Chinese Communist Party, and those studying in crucial fields, which the scientists are, of course, doing, and that's where most of the Chinese students are, in science and engineering. So, the Chinese didn't like this. They also didn't like that the United States has banned the latest semiconductors from Huawei, Huawei, which those of you who follow economics and business know is the giant Chinese electronics company. Then, on Wednesday, President Trump suspended the shipments of American semiconductors and some aerospace equipment needed by Chinese commercial aircraft. The Chinese were unhappy at these developments, and they have restricted exports of rare earth magnets. I see heads nodding from my usual, what shall I say, well-informed business types in the audience. Who ever heard of rare earth magnets? Well, a few people. They're crucial for cars. Cars can't run without them. Aircraft can't run without them. And they have many other applications in electronics. And China produces 90% of the world's output. And that's where we get our rare earth magnets, if the Chinese let us. And given the steps the Trump administration has taken, the Chinese have retaliated. So while we usually think in terms of tariffs being the issue, at the moment we've got this 90-day freeze in both countries. But we have these trade embargoes, which are very, very important. Okay, now the decision of that little-known court, it's the Court of International Trade. It's part of the American government, and it has neutered the president's initiative, that is his Liberation Day, April 2nd, but also the Chinese tariffs, by saying that all of these are illegal, that the rationale that President Trump has used to impose them is illegitimate, and therefore all of the tariffs, the 10% against all the countries in the world, the penguins who can't export anything, all that stuff has been declared illegal. The challenged tariff orders will be vacated and their operation permanently enjoined, the three-judge panel said. The three judges, one was appointed by George W. Bush, one by Obama, and one by Trump himself, and they all agreed. It is likely the Supreme Court, while it's been friendly to the president in many matters, will agree with this panel, because the violation, the use of laws incorrectly in the view of this court of international trade is fairly egregious. So these tariffs have been rejected, and we'll see what happened. Well, immediately what happened was the stock market went up, because the market does not like these tariffs, and they hurt. Which brings us to the second area, DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency. DOGE said it would cut waste, fraud, and abuse in the federal government. And it was going to cut $2 trillion. It's hard to keep these numbers in your head, but Mr. Musk and the president said they're going to cut $2 trillion from the federal spending. Now, if they did cut $2 trillion, and as the president said, he ruled out any cuts to Social Security, Medicare, and defense, then they'd have to shut down the rest of the government to get the $2 trillion. So it's unlikely that the $2 trillion was ever a serious number. And Mr. Musk said before he was fired from his job as employee of the government that maybe they would cut $150 million, not $2 trillion, by the end of the year. Now, the figures, and I don't know if we want to go into the details, but the figures DOGE gave of what they cut were examined by academics, by teams at the Washington Post, New York Times, and what all of them found was that the major items that DOGE claimed it had cut had already been spent, so they couldn't cut them, or were triple counted or double counted, and the real number is nowhere near that. I say all this because we tend to take things officials say either at face value or we just dismiss them totally, but I think it's important to see that the creation of alternative reality has power. I might also add, the agencies that Mr. Musk cut were those that regulated his businesses. They were given priority. And so that SpaceX was not asked why it didn't follow the rules on this and that. And excuse me. That would be very nice. Mr. Musk made it clear that the reason he moved so quickly and the reason the Trump administration moved so quickly to put all of these things in motion, to make all of these changes, he said, quote, "This is our shot. This is the best hand of cards we're ever going to have. And so we must move quickly, make these changes before anybody can try and stop us." And that is what they've done. The first thing he did, oh, thank you so much. I should get water and put it here. But the first thing he cut was, as you may know, the U.S. Agency for International Development. And it was a smart choice because Americans think that 10% of our budget goes to foreign assistance. It's actually well less than 1%, as people who know about these things in the audience nodding their heads. No, that is, this is not a big expenditure, but it makes a big difference. Millions of hungry people around the world could starve as a result of this action called government waste by Mr. Musk. I'll give you another quote here from Bill Gates. Bill Gates, the founder of Microsoft and a major philanthropist. The picture of the world's richest man killing the world's poorest children is not a pretty one. And of course it's not. Nicholas Enrich, the acting assistant administrator for global health at USAID, estimated that more than 5 million children would not get care to prevent pneumonia and diarrhea, which are the top causes of preventable disease deaths for children under the age of 5. 200,000 children would be paralyzed with polio, and 1 million children would not be treated for severe acute malnutrition. An additional 12.5 million or more cases of malaria for the year would mean 71,000 to 166,000 deaths. A 28 to 32% increase in tuberculosis, as many as 775 million cases of avian flu, and 2.3 additional deaths of children who would not get vaccination. So, by destroying AID, these were the consequences. The head of AID wrote to his staff in a memo that concluded that he himself would no longer be working as the audience at the organization because he too was fired. Musk's response to criticism was to post online that AID is, quote, a criminal organization. Time for it to die. Okay, the president had called federal employees crooked, dishonest, and his deputies had vowed to purge them from government and make them suffer. Trump had blamed federal workers for destroying this country. Quote, some have found themselves fired, many had been ridiculed as lazy and corrupt. Those were the president's words. They were locked out of their offices by police, fired for political disloyalty, and told to check their emails to see if they could still draw. Okay. Check. Okay, the firing, and in some cases the hiring of tens of thousands of these federal workers has now reached a point where Mr. Trump and his administration have lost between 96 and 98% of all court cases that people have challenged their actions in. That is, the courts, the lower courts, not yet the Supreme Court, have agreed that what he has done is illegal, and the cost to the American economy, to the American people, to the federal workers, many of whom are suffering from trauma, as was the intention. One more quote. Russell Vought, do people know Russell Vought? I know he's a friend of Joe's. What is his position in government?
I don't remember the name.
He's Trump's budget director. And he said, we want the bureaucrats to be affected when they wake up in the morning. We want them to not want to go to work because they are increasingly viewed as the villains. We want to put them in trauma. This is what the budget director wants to do, and this is what DOJ has done, or depending on how all these court cases come out and where where the government employees are now, whether they're willing to go back to work if the courts allow them. We don't really know. Okay, so we're up to the big, beautiful bill. There was an interesting article today, either in the Post or the Times, I'm not sure, about Trump's use of the word beautiful. Anybody see that? That everything is beautiful. It's the go-to word in Trump's vocabulary. But as far as the big, beautiful bill is concerned, this is a single piece of legislation that is going to cut taxes overwhelmingly to the very wealthy and pay for it by cutting government waste, fraud, and abuse, by throwing hundreds of people off of Medicaid, denying food stamps, and other things aimed at the poorest Americans more than the middle class, and certainly not the upper class. So there's $600 billion in cuts to Medicaid, the Children's Health Insurance Program, along with food stamps, another $290 billion. It is the biggest cut in our already not very good welfare state safety net that we've had. The nation's highest income families, defined as the top 0.1%, would receive an average tax cut of at least $250,000 each year. The average tax cut for affluent families is probably going to be larger than that, but until the Senate puts in its version and they negotiate, the Republicans in the House, both the Senate and the President, we won't know what the final numbers will be. But we do know that healthcare providers in poorer regions, especially rural regions, hospitals will be closing because most of their patients are on Medicaid, and without the income from Medicaid, the hospitals won't be able to survive. And nursing homes will also face a challenge. The Biden administration had a rule that required at least 3.48 hours of nursing care per resident per day and a registered nurse on site at all times. Trump has reversed that rule, abolished the rule. So now many of the for-profit nursing homes are going to cut staff to make more money, cuts treatment of patients and so on. So the character of the American economy, if this stuff goes through, will be very, very different. Republicans argue that the failure to extend and increase the 2017 tax cut would increase taxes on 62% of taxpayers, which it would, but most get very small tax cuts. The big tax cuts don't go to regular people. So when this happened, and the Joint Committee on Taxation, that's Congress's committee, is now estimating $3 trillion over 10 years, and that may underestimate what the legislation is going to cost the Treasury in income. And that means more cuts will have to be made to pay for this. I won't go into more of that because it's both depressing and I think you have the idea. What did happen as the House passed this bill, their version, Moody's, that is the credit evaluator, reduced the credit of the United States from its highest rank to just below that. because it's afraid that the deficits will be very bad for the American economy. It's not saying it will be, but it's saying the risk has increased. And with the Moody's pointing to decades of gridlock and dysfunction in the nation's capital, and it found Democrats and Republicans both responsible for this increased deficit. Because it's always easier for politicians, instead of raising taxes to pay for things they want to do, to borrow money so nobody's taxes have to go up, and voters don't blame them, even as the national debt rises to a point where foreigners are becoming hesitant to buy American assets, and in fact are selling them. And this is serious. Okay, so given all of this, the questions are, and here we're talking about these three areas, the tariffs and also the tit for tat restrictions on trade, the DOGE firings and closing departments and agencies, and the bill that will increase deficits. All of these things will create difficulties for the American economy. So when we ask what's happening, we can't really be sure, because the Supreme Court will finally weigh in on a lot of this, what they will allow, what they won't allow, what will be declared the president's prerogatives, what won't be. And we don't know what the Republicans, because there are a number of Republicans who really do not like the growth of the national debt. They're old-style conservative Republicans who want to prevent this, and yet their votes are needed to pass a bill. So can Trump and Musk threaten them with being primary, where their opponents will have huge sums of money to get rid of them? Well, many of them are from very conservative areas, and the voters agree with them, and it won't be so hard to get rid of them. So that's a factor. On the Democratic side, there is unanimity to fight this bill and prevent the cuts to Americans of vital services. So we don't know what's going to happen with the bill. We don't know what's going to happen with tariffs. We don't know what's going to happen with whether DOGE is legal or not. And so the answer to your question of what's going on in the economy is, I don't really know. Okay, I want to conclude by talking about China, because China is the big shadow over the American economy and over American economic politics. China's trajectory is very different than the United States. In the United States, spending by the federal government on research and development, including medical research at universities and other research, is the basis of Americans' leadership in the world and its more rapid growth rate than other countries, because we innovate, and the basic research is necessary. Once the government has figured out something, the companies could come in and create products and services based on the basic research. But the companies don't do that research. It's too expensive, it takes too long. That's why the government does it. China is putting huge amounts of money into basic research. It also is automating its factories at breakneck speed. The government is subsidizing the automation so that what the Chinese call the secret weapon in the trade war is an army of factory robots powered by artificial intelligence that have revolutionized manufacturing in China, not in the United States. It could have been, and it could be in the United States, but the government would have to change its policies and subsidize these, and not to be too partisan about it, as President Biden and the bills that were passed during his administration subsidized companies to do. All of that was taken away. So, as Keith Bradshaw, he's been reporting on China for decades, he commented, America facing Trump's tariffs as with engineers and electricians tending to fleets of robots. These operations in China are bringing down the cost of manufacturing while improving quality. Premier Li Qiang, China's second highest official, said in his 2025 annual report to the legislature that his country's plans for the year, including an effort to vigorously develop intelligent robots. The country announced a $137 billion national venture capital fund for robotics, artificial intelligence, and other advanced technologies. The Chinese are pouring their money into the industries of the next century, of this century, of the 21st century, not trying to recreate the American economy of the 1950s, which, with coal mining and all the other things, the president has promised he would do. So, their government is paying for the construction of factories, for replacing equipment, and all of this to produce, it's also producing 350,000 mechanical engineer graduates each year, because the robots need people to watch over them, keep the algorithms on track, and so on. These factories don't need unskilled labor, they need these trained engineers. We don't have these trained engineers. Most of the people studying engineering in America are not Americans. In the past, they would have stayed here and offered us this workforce. But they're being told to leave the country because foreign students are not welcome. Also, foreign American researchers are having their grants taken away. France and England and Canada are offering them inducements to come to our country, where we will pay you to do your research and help our economy grow, since you're now unemployed and without grants in the United States. And a number, of course, are accepting this. So China already leads global production in multiple industries: steel, aluminum, shipbuilding, batteries, solar power, electric vehicles, wind turbines, drones, 5G equipment, consumer electronics, the active pharmacy ingredients that our drugs need, bullet trains. I don't know if anybody's been to China and ridden on their bullet trains. Amazing, amazing. The speed and the comfort, you're going 220 miles an hour, and it's not, you're not shaking, nothing. On Amtrak, you're shaking going 40 miles an hour. And of course, the new terminals and all the rest of it. So we have a difference. We also have, I want to just mention one other technological area. The Chinese startup DeepSeek launched its artificial intelligence chatbots at the beginning of this year. Many Americans suddenly realized that China could compete successfully in artificial intelligence. Indeed, their system uses far, far less electricity than what the higher cost American artificial intelligence systems require. That is, the Chinese cost so much less to run their artificial intelligence system. and they're more efficient than ours in tests comparing side by side the systems. This is not good for America that thought we would lead the world in artificial intelligence, and this would make our economy grow faster than others. Then there are electric cars. The Chinese electric car maker, BYD is its name. Few Americans have heard of it. Elon Musk used to laugh it off as a joke until it overtook Tesla last year in global sales. So the Chinese are producing better and less expensive electronic vehicles. You're not going to be able to buy them here because the administration is keeping them out. But all over the world, people are buying them, and their cars are getting better and better. So China is moving quickly in a number of drug discoveries. They're also moving very fast and making progress. I don't want to go through all of this. I do want to say that China faces its own challenges. Its population is aging because of the one-child policy. Its population will be declining further. The clean water in China is a problem. Agricultural land is, the housing market is in crisis. That people have bought homes that weren't constructed yet and won't be constructed because the construction firms gone bankrupt. The housing industry is in trouble. So I'm not saying that China is this perfect economic system, but it is in the key areas of the future moving ahead, and we are not. So what's happening in the economy is not just what's happening to the U.S. economy and what it may mean, but in global terms, the policies of the American government are not up to challenging the policies of the Chinese government. And that is also, besides the large debt and all these other things, what's happening in the economy today. Okay, I'll stop there, and other questions or comments people want to make? Yakov, as always, has the microphone, and as fast as he is, he will get to you.
As you were speaking, I was thinking about the role of government. The pyramids were built by government, not by individuals.
Would you mind taking this around?
All right. Questions? Comments?
Bill?
So in the past, we've been worried about the Chinese invasion of Taiwan. Doesn't look like that's necessary.
I
think the situation in the U.S. is not quite as bleak as you presented it.
Good.
There are substantial investments underway which take time to modernize, say, semiconductor manufacturing in the U.S., as well as manufacturing of other things like TVs. And we can point out too that it's not all China that's doing this. The most important tool in semiconductor manufacturing comes from the Netherlands, which is the optical system that allows the shrinkage. So it could, right now, of course, it's been destroyed, but we were beginning to be again on the right track.
Yes.
Getting over here, and with the cooperation of Taiwan, which was the most advanced semiconductor manufacturer, I hope it can be replaced, restarted again. But some of the investment is going.
Yes, it could be rebuilt, and Webb's quite right. There are signs in certain areas that it is happening, but investors are holding back to see what's going to happen because they need their supply chain, that any of the profit-making investments they could make depend on being able to import certain parts or certain pieces of what they're doing. Now, Taiwan Semiconductor is going to build a plant in Arizona, and that will make a big difference because then we will have access to the chips we need, more advanced chips. So that's true, and that's a good thing. There was a hand in the back. Right.
You gave a great summary of all the economic problems that we're having. We've already felt one because we have a place in Florida that we're trying to sell, and the ripple effects of the things that you mentioned have, because of the high mortgage rates, the fact that the Canadians want to leave this country and have no belief that they are friendly here. The fact that we are not friendly to the world in general. So people are selling their real estate, and Florida is really a disaster area for people like us who are trying to sell a condo there so that we can afford to enjoy your talks.
Yeah, it's a problem, and part of your problem is that Florida real estate is soon going to be underwater. That the flooding in Florida has reduced real estate values. So besides everybody trying to sell to go back to where they came from, they can't insure their property. So I feel sorry for you, and I'm sure everybody in the audience will pitch in a few dollars. Somewhere?
It is working, yes.
I got it, thanks, yeah. I lived in Southeast Asia for a couple of years, back in the 60s, in a rural area. And the housing there was perfect for the climate. And I think the more we try to look ahead, that technology is not going to solve having safe housing and a good environmental situation for the human beings. I'm not saying we should ignore it, but I think we need to start looking ahead because Trump and his crowd are not going to last forever. From them trying to stop, climate change, them not wanting to stop climate change.
The young man in front wants to talk. I call Carl a young man because he has 10 years on me.
Next thing you'll know, you're a Mets fan. Anyway, it was very nice to hear an economist say, I don't know, because that's along with my feeling about what economists generally know. But I want to put you to prognosticate anyway. Is Trump's attacking the non-documented workers going to strongly affect our agricultural economy?
Yeah, if he succeeds, it will raise the price of lots of things that the immigrants are now doing, the low-wage work that's essential for the economy. And we'll see that in higher prices if, in fact, huge numbers or large numbers are, in fact, thrown out of the country. He has been deporting people who've been in the country for decades. And in small towns across the country, people have rallied to the support of the cafe waitresses, of the guys working in the gas stations, the people they deal with every day, people who are in their churches and their community. And I think calling all of the people he's deporting violent aliens, which he's down to, he's not saying he's just deporting everybody, he's saying he's only deporting the undesirables. But when research is done on who these people are, they're not criminals. And I think eventually the courts will keep refusing to let him do it. And if he does it anyway, you're moving towards a constitutional crisis. And a lot of what we're seeing, the uncertainty, is will he really do it? Will he get away with it? If he did, yes, our low-cost labor force will go and there'll be inflation. Americans generally do not want to work in the fields, bent over, doing the back-breaking work the immigrants do. So if that happens, you're exactly right. But it's not clear it will happen. Again, the uncertainty around all of this is very great. And the outcome will depend in part on whether Americans protest in large enough numbers and loudly enough and effectively enough to give the courts more backbone to resist him and prevent the army, which is composed of American people, that they not go and take orders from a commander-in-chief when the orders are illegal or unconstitutional. So again, it will depend finally on the American people. And here, when you watch what happened in Hungary, what happened in Turkey, these dictators, the autocrats, have gotten away with a lot. But even there, they're beginning to see resistance as they mess up the economy, as they messed it up in Hungary, as they messed it up, are messing it up in Turkey and in India. That Modi continues to be popular, but the economy is really going downhill at an unpleasant rate, where India a few years ago looked like it could be the future. So it depends finally on ordinary people and whether they're willing to shake their head and say, oh, this is terrible, or whether there is some resistance that is visible, strong, and active. And since I've gone quite a while, I think you better end on that. Thank you all so much.